Welcome everyone to our webinar today on pricing strategy, building a strategy for 2024. Exciting content. We're going to take a look on what makes a good strategy, how you build it, and also how AI plays a role here, how you can leverage those new advancements. Your speaker today will be Ingo Reinhardt, as always, MD and founder of Buynomics. He's spent a large part of his career in pricing and developed the Buynomics method, the virtual shopper technology. We'll take a brief look on that in a second. Myself, I'm Chief of Staff at Buynomics, been with the company for quite a couple of years now, and at the moment leading, among other things, the product development. Briefly on us, for those who don't know us yet, we're a SaaS provider to empower you to take better revenue management decisions. What that includes is building your portfolio, building your pricing strategy, building your pricing decisions. I'm going to take a look on both of those today, but also taking a look on other levers. So in our SaaS tool, you can work on finding the right compositions of your portfolio, your pricing, your promotions, your trade terms in a truly holistic approach, benefit from a very easy, intuitive handling, and make profitable decisions in just a couple of minutes. If you're interested, feel free to reach out. We're happy to jump on follow-up calls. Now, before we go, quick reminder, feel free to share any questions. So if you have anything you want to discuss, anything you're interested in to follow up on, any topics you want to get our insights on, feel free to post them in the Q&A section. We're going to take some time at the end to answer those. And now, Ingo, I would say without further ado, let's jump in. I think there's a lot of content we want to share today.
Yeah, thanks, Anton, for the introduction, and thanks everyone for joining the webinar. I think we have something interesting to share and discuss. Why are we talking about pricing strategy? I think it's because it's an important topic, and also I think we always enjoy talking about strategy. Before I started with pricing and revenue management a long time ago, I was doing strategy at universities where I also wrote my PhD. So I hope I have some stories to share, and that's what we want to do today. And then in the end, combine pricing and strategy and see what comes out of it. All right. So I think to get started, the initial question that we should ask ourselves is, why do we even need pricing strategy? If we look at like the standard microeconomic model, and also the model where like when we use in our daily life, concepts like price elasticities, what we're actually assuming as a background is something like what we're showing here. So looking at a single product, if we change the price 1%, lose 2% in sales. So we have a price elasticity of -2, costs are 100. And if we are actually living in that world with a constant elasticity in this case, then we know that our profit optimal price is 200, because in the optimum margin times elasticity always has to be -1. So it's fairly straightforward, margin 50%, optimal price, and we're done. So no need for strategy in this case. So if we're actually living in a world like that, that is that simple, there's really no need for strategy. Luckily for us, I think we're not actually living in such a simplistic world, but we're living in reality, and reality is, of course, much more complex, and that's why we need to discuss strategy. And really, there is really no need for strategy unless there's lots of uncertainty in the world, and we need to have a way to deal with that. In general, when most people think about strategy, there are all kinds of different understandings what strategy actually means. And just to put two extremes here on the table, I think those are the cases that are typically separated in people's understanding. And they switch somewhere between what we have here on the left side, strategy as trickery. So sort of like the Trojan horse, you find one trick or you make one move that saves the day. So in our business world, you find the magical price that optimizes your profit, increases much more over the previous year, you find a new pricing model, you go from selling products to a subscription that doubles your profit, everyone's happy. So that's the type of thing. Strategy is trickery, looking for the silver bullet. The other extreme is more strategy as planning or formal planning. You have you're faced with a complex situation, as here highlighted by classical work on strategy from Clausewitz, there in the context of politics and war. For us, of course, more in the context of business and profit, revenue optimization. But the idea is to have like a really formal plan that helps the organization achieve its goals. And somewhere in between is typically the reality we live in. I think we're always looking or hoping for this trickery, like this 5-0 victory in a soccer game. But in reality, most of the day will be spent here more on the right side is informal planning. And what we want to talk about in this webinar is also more on the right side, what we can do, and particularly with a view on what that means for the coming year and for the challenges ahead of us. So always when we approach it or are faced with relevant complexity, uncertainty, it's always helpful to have a proper framework at hand. And to me, the one that in strategy that I find most useful is this one here, this 3-step approach to defining and then implementing a strategy is a framework by Richard Rommel. And essentially it goes in 3 steps. First one, diagnosis, getting a good understanding of the nature of the problem, understanding the dynamics. We'll go into more detail later in a few minutes, what that means in the business case. Then defining a rough, like a guiding policy, a direction of how we deal with the complexity and achieve our goals. And then based on that, defining, which is then essentially the hard work, a coherent strategy, a coherent implementation, coherent action to implementing the defined strategy. So this roughly a framework, and we'll show first with a very simple example what that means. And we do this so that we, with an example that I think everyone knows, but probably many know it in somewhat different way. But the good thing is, if we use these stories, we don't need to spend much time on the context, but we can really go into the details right from the beginning. And therefore, we use the very well-known story of David and Goliath. And we go through this 3-step approach from a strategic point of view, and then you will hopefully see that from a strategic point of view, the situation is very different from how the situation is typically perceived. So let's start with the diagnosis. And as good strategists, we do this with a straightforward approach by using SWOT analysis. So, and if we go through that, first steps are very easy and straightforward. So threat, very obvious when we do this analysis from David's point of view. Threat is Goliath, strongest man in the known world, considered undefeatable. Weakness, also very obvious. If, as David, you look in the mirror, you see weakness, not a very strong physical appearance. So that's the part that's typically well known. What's less known is that David is very good with the slingshot. And what's even probably more important is that no one really knows that. So he has a secret weapon that no one's aware of. And there's also an opportunity because David spotted a spot in Goliath armor that's unprotected, and that happens to be right between his eyes. So this is the opportunity from David's point of view. What would be the guiding policy, how to deal with this situation? And that's also, I would say, very straightforward. Thinking I can beat him if I can hit him with my slingshot before he comes too close to me. And to be able to do that, I need to be agile and go to get a good shot at Goliath, and that's the only chance that I have. What does it mean for coherent action? There's always a detail in the story that before the fight, David was offered an armor to protect him, and he rejected that. And it sort of sounded foolish in this situation, but from a strategic point of view, that's very straightforward, because in what would the armor do? It would only make him slower. And if attacked, it wouldn't really help him very much. So that's why, from a strategic point of view, it's the right thing to do, to reject that armor, get that first shot, and we all know the story ended. So this is, from a strategic point of view, the story of David and Goliath. And if you think, and I've done that for a long time, think about the story from this perspective, it's actually quite different. And you see that David really had a shot in the literal sense to win this one here. And you need strategy and a proper framework to understand that. All right, so what does that case mean for pricing and revenue management? Here we also apply these 3 steps: diagnosis, guiding policy, coherent action. Diagnosis, we always need to know what we're aiming for in pricing. We need to understand the dynamics of the markets, what happens if I increase prices, what happens when I change the price model, and so on. Use that to develop a guiding policy, understand what levers do I have in pricing. Do I only want to change prices? Do I want to use things like dynamic prices, or do I want to work with stable prices? Do I want to work with promotions? Use other features or tools in the toolbox in my strategy. And then in the 3rd step, have coherent action to then really implement the strategy, build the proper processes in the organization, and implement the strategy that we have developed. So let's go through these steps in some detail. And the first one is the overall objective that we have as an organization. And for pricing or revenue management in more general, everything that I've seen really points to 2 things that are relevant: revenue growth and profit growth. And pretty much every organization works in some sort of trade-off between the 2. When you ask someone, are you aiming for like a pure profit optimization? They most of the time say no. If you ask them, are you aiming for pure revenue optimization? They typically say no. And in most cases, teams opt for something like profitable growth, which is somewhere in the middle of the trade-off between the revenue and profit optimization. And here really the role of pricing and revenue management is very different from all the other roles in the organization, because all the other functions, production, logistics, HR, everyone is working on improving the value that the company delivers. So sort of moving outwards this boundary here, whereas pricing and revenue management steer where the organization lies, or how close the organization gets to the optimum that's achievable for the organization, and how it selects the trade-off between revenue and profit optimization. So in that sense, what really concerns the goal of the organization, it's key financials, pricing, revenue management have a very specific role. Everyone else produces value. Revenue management, pricing are concerned with capturing the proper share of that value that's produced by the organization. We're looking at 2024, the next year, and the question is always what will be the main topics, and we'll just quickly go through them, and then we want to also get your input, what you think are the main topics of the coming year, and then we'll look into some of them in some detail. From our point of view, we have highlighted 5 trends or specific topics that we see as important for the next year. I think the first one, inflation, has been around for a long part last year. It looks like inflation rates are going down, but what's challenging for pricing, and also what makes the topic more important and interesting, is the volatility inflation rates. That you have high inflation, now it's going down, might go up again, or might go down further. But the important thing is that there's massive volatility in both the costs of producing products and also in the prices that competitors charge, and also the potential prices that we can charge for our products. The other one is also somewhat related to that, are changes in shopper behavior, changes in the willingness to pay, changes in how much money certain demographics have at their disposal. And we see this in things like growing importance of private labels in many categories, for example, focus on discounters. There are also trends like increasing share of online business that really play a role and need to be considered moving forward. The next key point that we see are regulatory changes, ESG, for example, everything that goes around that really from pricing and revenue management perspective, put some limits to what can be done in certain categories, where you can't run certain promotions, where there are limitations to how you can change prices and so on. So these are important to consider. Then there are technological changes which might affect the choice of business models that are available. And of course, the last one is also, I would say, very key are the capital market requirements. What we've seen are massively increasing interest rates, and that really affects also the trade-off between revenue and profit that we just looked at it on the previous slides, in the sense that if interest rates are low, future profits are more important than when interest rates if interest rates are low, future profits are more valuable than when interest rates are high. So if interest rates increase as they do now, that really puts more importance on the short-term profitability rather than the long-term profitability, and that tends to lead to a focus in pricing more towards profit rather than revenue growth. So all of these factors are really important to what we do in pricing and revenue management, and our task really is to get these different factors together, align them, and really then optimize with the organization value in mind. How do we do this? And always when we talk about pricing, revenue management, I think it's always helpful to look at the core, and that for us is really supply and demand. And when we look at the graph, similar to the one that we've looked at in the beginning, all of these different trends can have an effect on that graph. And I think I've just missed the survey. I'll just quickly go back to the slide and and ask Jonathan to put up the survey.
Yes, I will launch it now. Thanks, Ingo.
All right, so please answer the survey questions. What's in your point of view here most important moving forward of the ones that we showed? And if you think none of these are important, then also just put other, and probably easiest if you write in the comments what else you think is important moving forward, and we're happy to discuss that towards the end of the webinar.
We're close to 60% participation. Let's get to 70, then I'll share the results with you.
I can everyone already see the results, or?
No, just when we ended.
Okay.
Okay, I think we have enough answers. Then I will share it. Here are the results.
Okay, so everyone can see it. So it's okay. I would have thought that inflation was more important, but essentially inflation and change in shopper behaviors really stick out. It looks like the rest is less relevant. If someone has put other, really would be interested in knowing what that is, we're happy to discuss that towards the end of the webinar, but really the focus is on inflation, and I would say closely related with that is changes in shopper behavior. But that's also, so essentially I would say it's a continuation of the key topics that we've already seen in the past month. Just finish this. Okay. All right, interesting. But that's good, because those are also the topics that we'll be focusing on. All right, so how do these things affect us? And when we won't go into all of them, but things like inflation really affect often the cost of our products, cost increase or cost decrease. So this immediately affects the profitability of the organization. It also, what we discussed, both inflation and the changes in shopper behavior really affect the demand curve here. Things like changing capital market requirements might change where we put our pricing, knowing all of this graph and knowing the price volume relationship. So this is always helpful. Won't go into all details. I think we share the slides afterwards if you want to take a more detailed look here. We're also happy to discuss this afterwards, but it really helps understand the situation and how these trends affect the price and demand relationship here. Let's look at one example which is the inflation example that we just that you also found to be very interesting or relevant. What do we see here? So in the main graph, we see a graph with prices. Just move this. The green one is total sales. So this is one product in one category. It always has these spikes because of promotions. So sales go up. And typically when the sales go up, you see in the corresponding price graph that average prices in that for that product in the category go down. So you always see when prices go up, when prices go down, that sales go up, and this is typically a promotion. And you see pretty much the year 2020 here, it's fairly flat as an overall trend. And then you see with the start of inflation that prices go up towards the end by around 35%. And you see that in the end, after going down a bit, sales recover and you don't really have a shift in the sales volumes. Why is that relevant? And I think the dots here in the upper graph, they are black. They shouldn't be black, so I think they're a bit difficult to see. But the core idea here is that if you do a regular price elasticity measurement, and this graph just shows price versus volume for the period just until the price increase phase in 2022, you see with or without promotion doesn't really make much of a difference in this example here. You see a price elasticity of minus 1.5. And if you have a price increase with inflation, 35%, price elasticity minus 1.5, you would expect sales to drop by roughly 50%. This is not what happened. So, and the message here really is that with the increase of inflation, also everyone else increased prices, and consumers in the end went back to the normal sales volumes that you would be very off if you just applied the pre-inflation price elasticity here of minus 1.5 to the inflationary phase. And you really need to, if you want to really apply pricing in these phases of very high inflation, you really need to understand the proper dynamics in this case. And in this case, what's relevant is that if everyone else also increases the price, then the price elasticity obviously is much, much lower. And this is also what we see here. So this is a case where just doing the pricing with a regular price elasticity analysis based on a regression, in this case on a simple linear regression, would be very off, and you need sort of the proper tools and proper diagnosis, understanding that if everyone increases prices, price elasticities will be very different. We now roughly talked about the part of diagnosis in this case, and to properly do this, it always makes sense to have a framework. We'll send this here in the slides after the presentation, where you really understand, so what are the objectives that we just discussed, the objectives, what are in terms of typically revenue and profit, broken down then by countries where relevant, per channel and so on, and devising the proper guiding principles for that. So in this case, typically what type of tools you want to use. Do you only want to work with pricing, or what many did during inflation, also consider, for example, pack size changes rather than price changes. So these are the things that need to be considered. And for that, as pricing managers or revenue growth managers, there are many levers that we can use. Looked at prices, but others are, of course, price pack architecture might reduce the pack size rather than increase the price. You might work differently with promotions. What we're seeing now in many cases are, now that inflation is going down again, people don't want to reduce their regular prices, they apply more promotions, and in that way sort of reduce the actual price over the year. So there are different levers that are available, and that where it makes sense for us to also apply them together. Here's an example where there's a trade-off where different levers are being used together, moving from a high-low strategy. So a company that had promotions here in this case every couple of weeks, where they had a massively reduced price, and then went from that to an everyday low price strategy. And you still see some up and down. In this case, that comes from the fact that others in the category are still working with promotions, and there are special days, for example, Christmas, where there are increased sales. But what we're trying to say here is that if you have these levers at your disposal, and you define, I also want to work with these different promotion strategies. You really have different things that you can do as an organization to really use all these levers together to improve your pricing. And to do this properly and implement it once you've decided what levers you want to use, you need to have the proper processes, decisions, and typically, and this is just because we're a software company where we want to just spend another minute on, are the proper tools that really allow you to look at these things together. And what they do, and I think what's really becoming more and more important in the field, conferences that we went to, we saw that quite a lot, that the importance of AI technology is really increasing in the field, and we're one, or consider ourselves one of the players in the field that are introducing such tools. And what do they really do? I think it's three things. They allow you to integrate all kinds of different data, and use that data to better understand the behavior in the market, understand how shoppers, how customers react to changes in the offer, but also what competitors typically do. Are there competitors who will only increase prices with inflation? Are there competitors who will always follow what we did the previous period, and so on? So it really helps you understand the market dynamics, and that allows you a very precise modeling of what happens when you change something in your pricing or more generally in your offer. And that allows you to really identify the best options, as we saw in the previous example with the everyday low price. Does it make sense to look at the price change, or is it much better to not run promotions at all and always work with a reduced price? So this is really what technology allows. And then coming back to the initial example before we then go to the Q&A section, we started this webinar really with an example where we said, okay, if we're living in a very simplified world where there's only one product, we know the price elasticity, and sort of this is the implicit assumption that we have in many cases. If that's the world we're living in, there's really no need for strategy. To us, there's really a substitute sort of for strategy. So, and I think it's easiest explained with this chess example. So when we look at this position here on the left side, it's called if I remember correctly, the Lucina position. So this is a rook endgame that's won for white. I won't go into the details, but for human, that looks like strategy, right? So you need to have the right strategy. You need to get rid of this rook here, push him out, build a bridge with the rook so that our king gets out, and then we push the pawn. So that's a strategic situation for a human. For a machine, it's not a strategic situation. For a machine, it's just a checkmate in 21 moves, right? And what we're saying here is that with better technology, AI technology, also in the pricing and revenue management field, what we see is that strategy is to some extent substituted, or certain aspects of strategy can be substituted by technology. And that means that many of the questions that used to be strategic in nature are now essentially a simple optimization problem once you've implemented the proper technology, or in this case now AI technology, to frame the challenge of price changes or price optimization, promotion optimization, and so on, as a simple optimization problem that now can be solved by the machine. So I want to end with that. Looking at the time, I think we're at the end of the half hour. Go and get back to you, Anton.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much. I think, as you said, there's the time is almost up. I still want to have one question in here. I think that's on everybody's mind a bit. We got it on private chat. So what's your take on generative AI? So tools like ChatGPT, how can they help in building a pricing strategy?
Yeah, that's a question that we actually see quite a lot at the moment. There are some use cases I think that are very legitimate. So using generative AI as an interface, and there are some that I find less convincing. What generative AI does, or let's start with a simple example. So we just had the example of chess. ChatGPT doesn't know how to play chess. ChatGPT also doesn't know how to set the right price. It essentially is a language model that formulates sentences based on text that it has seen in the past. So it can work as an interface between, in our case, a price or revenue management tool and the user. So you can, rather than use a tool like ours, you can use ChatGPT and ask it, okay, what's the profit optimum? What happens if I increase price 5%? And then it uses another tool to come up with that answer. What things like ChatGPT can't do are themselves come up with the right price recommendation because they are not trained on pricing data. And I think we did another webinar last week. If you want to know more, I suggest you look into that, where we go a bit into the differences between the technologies. It's not really made to answer pricing questions or revenue management question itself, but it can use other technology that does the work. So it works well as an interface. There are other things like data preparation that it can do well, but at its core, it's not a pricing tool. And there are very easy questions you can ask it to find that out.
Great, thank you very much. Given we're already a couple minutes over, we'll answer all the other questions privately. We'll reach out to you. Same for you. If you have further questions, feel free to reach out. Before we close, there's one more webinar we're going to have this year. It's on December 15th. It's a special one. I'm going to look at some myths and fairy tales, and then we're going to go on a short Christmas break, and we'll be back in January with interesting talks, interesting webinars. So stay connected, stay tuned. Thanks a lot for joining us today. Thanks a lot for joining us throughout the year. And we're looking forward to being in touch with you next year.
Thanks, Anton. Thanks, everyone. One addition, we'll also have many guests. I think we had one very successful guest webinar last month. We'll have more of these. So to be able to bring some much more broader content from different angles. Really looking forward to the next year. Have a good weekend. Yeah, looking forward before the new year comes to this next one, fairy tales. It's a bit more humorous. But it's a good way to end the year. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.